Like a mirage in the springtime, the mind is found bewildered. Animals imagine water, but there is no reality to it. So spring is in the air. The world is full of promise. We're like children in the candy shop, not knowing where to turn because everything is so enticing. Animals imagine water, but there's no reality to it. So it's animals that imagine water. It's our animal nature. Are we going to be led by it? It's like a dog, a young dog out on a walk. It's going everywhere. It doesn't know where to look. Everything is exciting. You might think it's a shame to move away from that. But we found something more exciting, more fulfilling. Now the world is often being compared to a mirage, and I suspect that's the meaning here, although it says the mind is the mirage. Like a mirage in the springtime, the mind is found bewildered. So it's the mind and its constructions which is the mirage. This is what we have to look beyond to the Muni, the silent sage, the witness that was mentioned in the previous verse, verse 6, who's cleansed of attachment, stainless both in this world and any worlds to come. So you might think, oh well, this is fairly straightforward. The mind is like a mirage, the world is like a mirage. You might have heard this kind of thing before. In fact, the first few verses seem to be a bit like this. The thing is, it's an emotional thing. This isn't an intellectual understanding. The appeal of the mirage is instinctive. It's emotional. It operates on a gut level. And if you're susceptible to an addiction or a fetish, then you've got some idea of the strength of the attraction that we're talking about. Actually, it's quite good if you do have an addiction or a fetish, because it lets you know exactly where you're at. It gives you a very clear demarcation of your working ground. And just by way of practical comment, don't think in terms of conquering your addiction or conquering your fetish. You might have some successes, but they're going to be outweighed by all the massive defeats. You've really only truly won when the fetish or the addiction has no longer got any interest for you, when it's no longer got any hold on you. So it probably helps not to think in terms of victory and defeat in this particular arena. And you might be thinking, well, I don't have any addictions, I've not got any fetishes. Well, it's possible you're in denial. The alcoholic in denial. Or perhaps they're not obvious. I was in the cinema recently watching the latest superhero blockbuster with my wife. And quite a few rows behind us there were a group of teenagers, boys and girls, who were more concerned with trying to impress each other. This is very important when you're a teenager. By not taking the film seriously, by assuming that somehow to get involved in the film would be a wee bit pathetic. So they had to impress each other by how cool and witty they were with their banal comments and infantile behaviour. And it was spoiling my enjoyment of the film. Nobody else in the auditorium seemed to be bothered. But I was wondering if I should go up and say something to them. I looked round and I felt my wife grabbing my arm. And I was wondering what I should say. And I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't go and say anything, because my feeling was out of all proportion to the occasion. It was like road rage. It's that feeling of road rage where you get into a voracious feedback loop of righteous indignation, whipping up a storm of anger. You might be thinking, well, they were spoiling your enjoyment of the film, Guru Gillis. You should have got up and said something. You had a right to enjoy the film. Now, this is part of the feedback loop, isn't it? Why was I letting them spoil the movie for me? Why didn't I just focus on the movie? Why was I focusing on them? They weren't being particularly noisy. So this was to do with me. It wasn't that my enjoyment was being spoiled by those teenagers. I was letting them spoil my enjoyment. Anyway, the point here is there was a lot of feeling there. There was a lot of emotion. My button had been pressed. It was very uncomfortable. So, you might not acknowledge a particular addiction or fetish, but perhaps there are certain situations which press your button. And are you sure you're free from addiction or fetish? What's your relationship with your computer, for example? How often do you feel you have to check your email or your Facebook status page? Or if you've got a YouTube channel, your number of viewers, and so on. In fact, the whole computer internet environment is like the mirage in the springtime, where the mind is found bewildered. There are so many things to look at, so many things to find out, so many possible people to meet. This is it, isn't it? There's quite an interesting article I was reading. I'll put the link in the notes section below, about the age of distraction. How some of us have these libraries full of books which seem to be being neglected. The thing about a book as opposed to an e-book or reading it online is you've got nothing else competing for your attention. In fact, there's a little application you can install on your computer, and it will disconnect you after a certain time. This application is called Freedom. It will give you freedom from all the distraction by just switching it off. And this is what we need with respect to this mirage that we call reality. We need to wire ourselves a little bit with an application just like Freedom. Perhaps we could call it liberation. We need to be able to switch off from this enticing mirage, this enchantment, this glamour, and come back to the vision of the world as the enlightenment practitioner, the Bodhisattva, sees it. The vision of the world as the Buddha sees it. The thing about a mirage is it doesn't satisfy. It's impermanent. And it doesn't have any intrinsic substance. It's what was described previously as egoless. These are the three marks of existence. This is how the Buddha sees the world. This is how the Bodhisattva sees the world. And this is how we, as enlightenment practitioners, at least from time to time, also see the world.